Mom screamed. "You're a complete embarrassment!" And threw my clothes out. I picked them up, smiled, and left. 2 years later, she regretted everything when you know. I still remember the exact moment it happened. Standing there in the front yard, holding a pile of my clothes while the sun beat down on me, and my mother, her face twisted with rage, screamed so loud the neighbors probably heard it. "You're a complete embarrassment!" Then, just like that, she slammed the door shut. No hesitation. No apology. No second glance. For a long second, I just stood there, barefoot on the concrete, the smell of dust and hot asphalt filling my nose. I could hear my clothes scattering in the breeze, shirts and jeans I had folded neatly only hours before now crumpled in the dirt like trash. She didn't even care enough to wait and see if I'd pick them up. As far as she was concerned, I was gone, already erased. And somehow, instead of crying or yelling like she probably expected, I just smiled. Not a big, triumphant grin. Not a smug smirk. Just a small, knowing smile, the kind you give when you realize you've finally hit the point of no return. Without a word, I bent down, gathered my things into a tattered duffel bag, slung it over my shoulder, and walked away. No plan. No car. No money. Just a simple, silent vow echoing in my chest. I will never come back. Not for a visit. Not for an apology. Not even for revenge. I knew right then this chapter of my life was over. And I was about to write a brand new one. One that didn't include her at all. Looking back, I realize. That moment on the street, it didn't come out of nowhere. The signs had been there for years, like tiny cracks spidering through glass, unnoticed at first, but growing deeper, sharper, deadlier with every passing day. It started when I was about 7 or 8. Nothing big at first. Just little things. Like how my mother would beam at my brother's baseball trophies, filling whole shelves with them, but leave my science fair ribbons stuffed in a drawer somewhere. Or how she'd brag about my sister's dance recitals to the neighbors but barely remembered to pick me up from my art shows. At first, I told myself it was just busyness. Or maybe I just wasn't as impressive. Maybe if I worked harder, studied more, stayed quieter, smiled bigger, she'd notice. Maybe she'd say, "I'm proud of you," without it sounding like an afterthought. I didn't understand then that love, real love, doesn't feel like chasing after a moving target. It doesn't feel like measuring your worth and how many favors you can do or how invisible you can become when they don't need you. But you don't realize that when you're a kid. You just keep running harder, trying to catch up to something that was never going to turn around for you. It got worse when I hit my teens. Any time I slipped up, a bad grade, a missed chore, anything, she'd weaponize it like an arsenal. "You'll never amount to anything," she'd snap, her words slicing deep. "You're such a disappointment." I could almost predict the phrases. They were like old, worn-out records she kept spinning whenever she needed to vent her frustration about life, about my father leaving, about things that had nothing to do with me. But the worst part wasn't the yelling. It was the indifference. Birthdays forgotten. Parent-teacher conferences skipped. Graduation day, an empty chair where she should have been. There's a special kind of loneliness that settles in your bones when you realize your own mother doesn't see you, not really. Not as someone she loves. Just as someone she tolerates when it's convenient. It built slowly, like rust on metal. By the time that final fight came, the screaming, the clothes, the slammed door, the metal was already corroded beyond repair. I just hadn't seen it clearly until then. It happened on a Tuesday. Funny how you always think it'll be some big moment, a holiday, a birthday, some dramatic storm rolling in. But no. It was just a plain, gray Tuesday, the kind of day that should have passed without memory. Instead, it changed everything. I had gotten home late from work, arms full of grocery bags. Rent was due soon, and even though I had been handing over almost every paycheck to keep the house running, there was always some new expense. Always some new way to remind me how much of a burden I was. I barely made it through the door before she started. "Where were you?" Her voice cracked across the living room like a whip. "Working," I said, setting the bags down carefully like I might break something, as if being careful could somehow calm the brewing storm. You should have been here hours ago. Your sister needed a ride. Your brother needed help with his project. I needed groceries. I gestured to the bags at my feet. I got the groceries. But she wasn't listening. She never really listened. You think you're better than us now? She spat. Just because you have a job? Just because you think you're so smart? I didn't answer. I knew better than to feed it. But silence was its own kind of gasoline. Before I knew it, she was pulling my clothes out from the hallway closet, not even just my work shirts, but old things too, the jacket I'd saved for months to buy, my favorite hoodie from high school, even the handmade quilt my grandmother had given me. All of it yanked out, thrown into the dirt. You want to act like you're too good for this family? Her face twisted into something almost unrecognizable. Fine. Get out. You're a complete embarrassment. And then the door. The slam was so loud the walls seemed to shake. I stood there on the porch, staring at the pieces of my life scattered at my feet. Old sneakers, worn jeans, a photograph that fluttered away into the gutter. Something inside me, something I hadn't even known was there, just clicked. Like a door inside me, too, slamming shut. No tears. No shouting. No pleading. I simply picked up my things, one by one, brushed the dirt off my quilt, shouldered my duffel bag, and turned to face the house one last time. Through the thin, cheap curtains I could see her silhouette, standing there, arms crossed, waiting to see if I'd crawl back. I smiled. Just a small, calm, knowing smile. And then I walked away. The last sound I heard was the soft crunch of gravel under my feet, growing fainter and fainter, as I left the only life I'd ever known behind. The first night was the hardest. I parked my car, a battered old Chevy that rattled if you sneezed near it, in the back corner of a Walmart parking lot, tucked between two broken-down RVs. I pulled a jacket over myself, tried to fold up into the driver's seat like I could somehow make myself smaller, invisible. The air was cold, sharper than I'd expected, and every creak of the metal around me sounded like a gunshot. I barely slept, kept jerking awake every time footsteps came too close or some drunk stumbled past. No one tells you how loud the world is when you have nowhere to go. The next morning, I woke up to the sun baking the inside of the car like an oven. My mouth was dry, my neck stiff, my stomach growling. I had $22 in my wallet. No real plan. No one to call. I spent that first day drifting from place to place. Libraries to stay warm, gas stations for bathrooms, fast food joints with dollar menus. Everywhere I went, I carried the same invisible badge on my chest. Homeless. Alone. And yet, underneath the hunger, the fear, the aching exhaustion, there was something else too. Something hardening inside me. A quiet voice that kept repeating. You made a promise. No going back. No matter what. There were moments, late at night, curled up in that car, stomach gnawing at itself, the smell of old upholstery in my nose, where I almost cracked. Where the loneliness whispered, just call her. Just say you're sorry. She'll let you come back if you crawl hard enough. But every time, I remembered the look on her face, cold, disgusted, triumphant, as she slammed that door. And I'd clench my jaw, stare up at the endless black ceiling of the night sky, and tell myself, I'd rather die out here than ever beg her again. The days blurred together after that. I picked up odd jobs, whatever I could find. Dishwasher at a greasy diner. Night shift janitor at an office complex where no one even bothered to learn my name. Stock boy at a 24-hour convenience store, stacking boxes until my arms ached. I slept wherever I could. In the car. Sometimes in the back rooms of jobs when the managers weren't looking. Once, under the rickety awning behind a bowling alley during a rainstorm, shivering so hard I thought my bones would crack apart. But slowly, painfully, the days started stacking, one on top of another. The way you build a wall, brick by battered brick. I wasn't saving much, but I was saving something. $50 here. $100 there. Enough to start imagining, for the first time in my life, a world that didn't involve scraping by for scraps of approval. A world where maybe, just maybe, I belonged to myself. It took 6 months before anything really changed. 6 months of grinding days and colder nights, of eating ramen in parking lots and washing my clothes in public sinks because laundry mats cost too much. 6 months of fighting the voice in my head that kept whispering, "Maybe you are an embarrassment. Maybe she was right." And then, one morning, something happened. I was working the early shift at the diner, elbow deep in dishwater, when a regular customer came into the kitchen. Old guy named Mr. Bennett. Always wore a gray cap with a frayed edge, always ordered the same black coffee and dry toast. I figured he was lost, but he walked straight up to me, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "You're the kid who parks that old Chevy out back, right?" he asked. My stomach dropped. For a second I thought he was going to yell at me for loitering. But instead, he said something I didn't expect. "You ever think about doing something better?" I blinked. "Better?" I repeated, not sure if I should be insulted or confused. He chuckled, this low, rusty sound, and shook his head. "I run a warehouse down on 5th Street. We need someone who's not afraid of hard work. Real work. Pays better than this joint. You interested?" I didn't even hesitate. "Yes," I said. He clapped me on the back, nearly knocked me into the sink, and told me to come by the next morning. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't some grand miracle. But it paid twice what the diner did, and it came with something I hadn't had in a long time, a real shot. The work was brutal. 12-hour shifts hauling crates, unloading trucks, stacking shelves until my arms went numb. But for the first time in my life, it felt like every drop of sweat actually meant something. Every calloused hand, every sore muscle was a reminder. I was building something now. Not just surviving. Growing. 3 months later, I had enough for a deposit on a tiny studio apartment. A real roof. My own key. A mattress on the floor, a lamp from Goodwill, 2 sets of dishes. It wasn't much. But standing there, staring at those bare walls, I felt something swelling in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Real, honest pride. No one could throw me out of this place. No one could slam the door in my face. This was mine. And it was just the beginning. The studio was tiny. The kind of place where you could fry eggs while lying in bed if you really wanted to. But to me, it was a palace. For the first time, I had silence when I wanted it. Freedom. A door I could close, a door no one could throw me through again. I worked at the warehouse by day and picked up side gigs by night. Painting fences. Moving furniture. Fixing broken sinks, patching drywall, anything I could learn, anything I could hustle. And somewhere along the way, an idea started to form. It started small. A guy at the warehouse needed help with his cousin's rental properties. Minor repairs, cleanup jobs, little projects the contractors didn't want to touch. I said yes. And then his cousin told a friend. And then that friend told another. Before I knew it, my weekends were booked solid, patching up rentals, fixing plumbing leaks, painting over scuffed walls. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't pretty. But it was mine. That winter, I spent every spare hour building a tiny business. Morgan Maintenance. Just me, a battered toolbox, an old pickup truck I bought at an auction for $600 and some duct tape. No loans. No help. No safety net. Just a man with calloused hands and a heart that refused to be crushed. The first few months were brutal. There were days I'd get home so tired I'd fall asleep still wearing my boots. Nights I sat at the kitchen counter, eating cheap noodles and wondering if I was crazy to think I could actually build something from nothing. But slowly, the calls kept coming. 1 job turned into 5. 5 turned into 10. By the time the second year rolled around, I wasn't scraping by anymore. I was thriving. I had a client list, repeat customers, referrals. I hired 2 part-time helpers. I even upgraded the truck, an old Ford that still smelled like cigarette smoke, but it ran like a dream. And for the first time in my entire life, I didn't owe my survival to anyone else. Not my mother. Not some landlord. Not a boss who could replace me with a shrug. It was all because I had decided, 2 years ago, standing barefoot in the dust, that I would never let anyone throw me away again. It happened on a Tuesday. Just like the day she threw me out. I was wrapping up a drywall job for a landlord on the east side of town when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. These days, if someone needed me, they usually came through my website, not some random call. But something made me pick it up. Hello? There was a pause, a thin, crackling silence, and then a voice I hadn't heard in 2 years. Daniel? My mother. The name she hadn't bothered to say the day she threw me into the street. I didn't say anything. Just waited. I heard you're doing well, she said, her voice small, hesitant. I was hoping we could maybe get lunch. Catch up? Catch up. Like we were old friends who had simply fallen out of touch. Not mother and son, not the woman who had screamed at me, thrown my life into the dirt, and locked the door without a second thought. For a long moment, I just stared out at the winter-barren trees, listening to the faint crackle of the call. Then I said quietly, You made your choice. Another silence. I was angry, she said, rushing now. I didn't mean it. Things were hard back then. They're different now. I miss you. I could almost hear the desperation leaking into her voice, like water through a cracked dam. I thought about my old car, parked behind Walmart. About the nights I shivered through storms without a blanket. About the way she had looked right through me, like I was something shameful to be swept out the door. I closed my eyes for a second. Not to summon anger, there was none left. Not even sadness. Just peace. Clean, weightless peace. I don't miss you, I said gently. And then, before she could cry, before she could argue, before she could reach into the past and pull me back down, I hung up. Simple. Final. Done. I stood there for a long minute after the call ended, feeling the cold winter air sting my cheeks. I thought I would feel guilty. I thought I'd feel regret. But instead I felt lighter. Freer. I was no longer the boy who waited for her approval. I was no longer the boy who packed his life into a trash bag and smiled at a slamming door. I was a man who had built his own life. A man who had survived despite her. And she would have to live with the choice she made that day. Just like I had. After that call, something strange happened. It wasn't dramatic. There was no swelling music, no cinematic fireworks. Just quiet. Like someone had finally shut off a noise I'd been living with so long, I forgot how loud it was. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without feeling like I owed somebody an apology for existing. For the first time, when I looked in the mirror, I didn't see a failure, or a burden, or a disappointment. I saw a man. Not perfect. Not polished. But real. Standing on his own 2 feet. The thing they don't tell you about walking away from people who tried to break you is that the healing doesn't come all at once. It's slow. It's awkward. Some days, it feels like nothing's changed at all. But then you notice. You laugh a little easier. You sleep a little deeper. You stand a little taller. And one day, you realize. You're not carrying their weight anymore. You're carrying your own dreams instead. For a long time, I believed being good enough meant earning love from people who treated it like a prize to be won. But it doesn't work like that. Love, real love, isn't something you have to beg for. It's not a transaction. It's not a performance. It's a quiet hand on your back when you're struggling. It's a voice that says, I'm proud of you, even when you're not perfect. It's someone staying, even when staying is hard. And if the people who are supposed to give it to you can't, you don't shrink yourself smaller trying to fit into their broken spaces. You find your own way. You build your own family, even if that family is just you, standing in the kitchen of a tiny studio apartment, toasting your own victories. Freedom doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like eating ramen on a mattress you bought with your own hands, and knowing no one can take it away. It would have been easy to stay angry. To let resentment settle into my bones like rot. After all, she had given me every reason. Every shove. Every slammed door. Every word that carved scars across my self-worth. But anger is heavy. And I was tired of carrying things that didn't belong to me. One night, months after that call, I found myself driving past the old neighborhood. The streets looked smaller somehow. The cracked sidewalks, the crooked mailboxes, the peeling paint, it all seemed frozen in time. For a moment, I thought about stopping. About walking up the porch steps one last time, knocking on that door, and saying everything I never said. But as I slowed the truck, window down, cold air brushing against my face, I realized there was nothing left to say. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need her approval. I had already won. Not because I had built a business, or scraped together a living, or stood taller now than I ever had under her roof. I had won because I had chosen me. I pulled over to the side of the road for a moment. Not because I was lost, but because I needed to really feel it. The full weight of everything I had survived. The years. The battles. The silent nights spent wondering if I'd ever be enough. I thought about the boy who once stood in this same neighborhood, clutching a garbage bag full of clothes, still hoping maybe, just maybe, she'd call him back inside. And then I thought about the man I had become. The man who knew that some doors, once closed, are never meant to be opened again. I whispered it out loud, into the quiet night. Goodbye. Not bitter. Not broken. Just free. Then I turned the truck around, never once looking back.